What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other word would smell as sweet. In William Shakespeare's play, Juliet tells Romeo that names do not matter. She claims that changing a name does not change who a person is. But in Jewish tradition, names do matter. As a rabbi, one of the most common questions that people ask me is how to choose the name of their newborn. My conversion students also give a great deal of thought to the Hebrew name they would like to have after becoming a Jew by choice. In the Torah, God often changes the names of major biblical heroes and heroines. Avram becomes Avraham, Sarai becomes Sarah, Yaakov becomes Yisrael, Hosea becomes Yehoshua. We are part of a tradition that teaches that names reflect who we are. God also has a name, which is first introduced in this week's Torah portion. In the very first verse of Parashat VaEra, God says to Moshe, VaEra el Avraham el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov be'el Shaddai, u'shemi Hashem Adonai lo nodati lahem. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Hashem, or Adonai, the name of God that is spelled Yud-He-Vav-He. The name of God, spelled Yud-He-Vav-He, is unpronounceable. We do not pronounce it the way it is written. There have been various attempts to pronounce God's name, for example, Jehovah, and that's considered to be improper by Jewish tradition. So the next time a group of Jehovah's Witnesses comes to your door, ask them why they are trying to pronounce God's unpronounceable name. In Jewish tradition, the name Yud-He-Vav-He was only pronounced one time every year, on Yom Kippur. In one place, Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And it was only pronounced by one person, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Some of you may have seen the play or the film by Ansky entitled The Dybbuk, and in it there is a scene that speaks of the holiest man in the world on the holiest day in the calendar at the holiest place on earth, pronouncing the holiest word in the Hebrew language. When these four kiddushot, these four holinesses come together, one wrong thought could destroy the entire world. According to Jewish tradition, we do not pronounce the name of God because that would be considered taking God's name in vain, in violation of the third commandment. When we daven or recite a blessing, we say Adonai, which literally means my Lord. When we talk, we say Hashem, which literally means the name. We try to avoid writing God's name. A manuscript or parchment or even a Xerox piece of paper that contains God's Hebrew name cannot be destroyed. It has to be put in a geniza or buried. By the way, this rule does not apply to the English word God. There's no requirement to write G-D, but many do. Every effort is made not to take God's name in vain by using nicknames that are 1 or 2 or 3 steps removed from God's original unpronounceable name, Yud-He-Vav-He. So what do these 4 letters in God's unpronounceable name mean? These 4 letters come from the Hebrew root He, Yud, He. The infinitive verb stemming from the root is lihiyot, which means to be. On the most basic level, the name Yud-He-Vav-He means that God is. In other words, God exists. God is a being. Well, this creates many interesting philosophical problems. Long ago, the Rambam, Maimonides, taught that the phrase God exists is not the same as the phrase this couch exists or these glasses exist. We can't use the term existence as it relates to God. Everything that exists in the world, like the couch, my glasses, everything is contingent. It could exist or it could not exist. But God is not contingent. God is necessary. If we posit God, then God has to exist. Rabbi Michael Gold suggests a different understanding of what God's four-letter name means, Yud He Vav He. He claims and points out that the root does not simply mean being. In last week's Torah portion, Parashat Shmot, when God introduced himself to Moshe, he used the name Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. I will be who I will be, which suggests a much more dynamic understanding of God. Rather than being, God is becoming. God is always in process. This seems to be the God of the Tanakh, of the Jewish Bible. God is affected by what happens in the world. God seems to flow, interacting with human beings, the very human beings that God created. The term Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, by the way, was mistranslated in the movie The Ten Commandments. It was mistranslated as I am that I am, suggesting that God's being is only in the present, that his being is somehow fixed rather than a work in progress that is continually in process. In ancient times, Aristotle referred to God as the unmoved mover. He envisioned a God who was unaffected by what happens to God's creations. But in marked contrast to this philosophy, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called God the most moved mover. It's a beautiful image, fitting with the notion of brit, bris, covenant. Not only did God create us, but we have the potential to, in a sense, also create God or contribute to God's creation. When we make choices in life, what would happen if we espouse the belief that every choice we make, every action we take, will affect our Creator? We would undoubtedly consider our choices much more carefully. Perhaps God's name Yud He Vav He hints at a dynamic and evolving God, a God who is ever influenced by the actions of human beings. This weekend we celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In light of the commentary I just shared on Parashat VaEra, the following words of Dr. King are particularly resonant. Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing co-workers with God. The time is always ripe to do right. With these powerful words, Reverend King conveyed the idea that human beings have the ability and the opportunity to work with God. With these words, Dr. King suggested that we, as human beings, have the ability and opportunity to be partners with God in making the world a better place. This is a similar idea to the words that we recite as part of the Aleinu prayer every day, L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, which may be translated as to repair the world in the sovereignty of God, or to repair the world with the sovereignty of God. Just as God may be influenced by us, so too may we be influenced by God. And just as God evolves, so too should we evolve, constantly striving to improve ourselves and the world in which we live. Just as Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, just as they did when they marched side by side across the Pettus Bridge from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama on March 21st, 1965. May we all engage in acts of chesed and tikkun olam in partnership with our ever-evolving God, Yud He Vav He, Adonai, Hashem. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.